other one, you bastard!
Brought to you by Buyee, freight forwarder extraordinaire, helping you get anything you could want from Japan. Still feels surreal saying that in a video, my god. Three things come to mind when you ask a Transformers fan what the 2000s were like. Movies, classics, and big, beefy gimmick toys. Especially in the former half of the decade, toy lines were dominated by Archer-era chunksters, loaded with play features and combining gimmicks. And none received more love and care than the multitude of Optimus Primes. Even at their clunkiest, they delivered some of the most iconic Primes the franchise has ever seen. Perhaps not to the general public, as they'll always associate Prime with the movies and G1, but definitely within the fandom. To this day, many still believe Prime is better suited as a fire engine as opposed to a flat nose or whatever you call this. I'm not a car guy, don't correct me in the comments, I don't care. Regardless, there's a lot of debate on which Prime from this period is the best. It usually boils down to two main contestants, and for a very long time, I've wanted to examine both and see which is the superior figure. So, well, today seems like as good a day as any. I've been afforded the opportunity to pit these two against each other, and I'm not going to pass it up. Greetings, Cybertron. I'm DrLockdown, and welcome back to another Versus review. Yes, indeed, it's been a while since the last one of these. 2 years, actually. My, how time flies. Regardless, today we're taking the top two contenders and finding out which is the best Optimus Prime of the 2000s. 2001's Robots in Disguise Optimus Prime, or 2005's Cybertron Optimus Prime. Now, it's obvious from a glance that these two were created under very different circumstances. They're both fire engines, sure, but RID Prime turns into a realistic Japanese model, while Cybertron Prime goes into full 2000s sci-fi, not looking out of place next to many Hot Wheels designs. This really comes down to the development of the shows themselves, in regards to what each show was trying to achieve. Starting with the former of the two, and paraphrasing TF Wiki, in essence, Car Robots, RID's Japanese release, was a last-ditch effort to revitalize the brand in Japan. TF Wiki neglects to mention it was in the face of the idol apocalypse, thank you Macross, but nevertheless the line was basically them trying to tap into nostalgia and somehow save the franchise from the brink. TF Wiki claims this wasn't very successful, but given the love the show has these days over there, I'm not sure that's entirely accurate. Either way, most of the line consisted of retools, with only a few new ones thrown in here and there. The molds they did produce really needed to push what was capable in Transformers, and lay the groundwork for a potential road to redemption. And of course, this monster of a figure was brought to life by Hisashi Yuki, whom since it had somewhat of a spotty track record featuring bangers like Reveal the Shield Lugnut, HasLab Deathsaurus, and Legacy Evolution Skyquake and Dreadwing, passable outings like every modern Star Saber, and shows like Legacy Knockouts, and Legacy. Yeah, he did that one. Not that you'd know it from vehicle mode, however, because this alt mode is clean as a whistle and almost solid as a rock. Loosely based on the Mitsubishi Fuso K series K201, it's so unique yet unmistakably Optimus Prime. The front really comes to life with the piercing transparent blue windows, creating a mean downswept look a decade before it became Sentinel's thing. The grille section isn't super detailed, and I reckon they could have gone harder, but the orange and silver paint is very appreciated, and I like that they've incorporated the unpaintable foot silver covers into the design as great sections on the top. Some of the silver feels a bit bland, as the original Takara edition featured license plate printing there, but still, it looks nice enough. Interestingly though, the text on the side remains unchanged from said Takara edition. I guess Cybertron works as the Japanese name instead of the Japanese faction title for the Autobots, but keeping the fire department kanji seems like an odd choice on the west side. Apologies, my kanji is I had to use Google Translate. Interestingly, the wheels also retain the fire convoy text, the original Japanese name for the figure before Hasbro imported it. Yes, I know the majority of longtime viewers already know that, but come on, we're not all terminally online in this fandom. Speaking of wheels though, this figure features the lost arts of chromed wheels and rubber tires. It really gives the figure a premium feel, especially in a rolling motion. Of course, depending on who you ask, rubber tires may be considered a blessing or a curse. If you're hunting down a secondhand copy of this, you may find these cracked, or worse, completely missing. Fortunately, my copy is in good nick, but it is something to keep an eye out on. Moving further back, RID Prime sports a pretty impressive back section. The main robot cab tapers off pretty well with the embedded voice box and segmented grating. Overall, the grating motif really helps bring the alt mode together, even in the messier parts of the design. Yeah, there's no getting around it. That's clearly the combined robot mode chest back there. That said, as said many times before, messy truck backs kinda come with the territory, regardless of which line you collect. This is hardly the most egregious example, and they do a good job of making it not stick out too much. Even the the head blends in pretty well, though you can see the designer used similar motifs between designs. Moving even further back, I love the extra painted details on the back, with the tail lights and steps. These days in mainline, they just leave it blank. But back then they had that extra budget to play with, even with the Hasbro version. Even the underside of the ladder gets extra pistons and grills, which you'd normally never notice. You can tell they had fun greebling this the f up, even if it doesn't go to the same level as Modern Warfare Cybertron and Legacy figures. Will say though, the computer on the side is kinda funny. As far as I know, this feature doesn't have any use other than looking cool. Still, need to have. Of course, a fire engine that doesn't do anything isn't that useful, so beyond the lovely ratcheting and extending, which of course all vehicles of this side kinda need, he also comes with a couple of spring-loaded gimmicks. Push the red tab on the front and 2 water hoses spring out. Nothing special, just a nice little feature, though on my copy sometimes one of them gets stuck. Still works fine though, even with hose ectile dysfunction, but the real star of the show is the massive missile rack. Push this tab forward and 4 missiles become ready and primed. Or throw themselves into the ether if you get the original Takara version. It's a really cool yet unintrusive feature, and if you prefer to ignore it and focus on the realism of the truck, you can absolutely do it. This toy isn't packed with features, but what is here is quite fun. It doesn't actually seem like it's trying to pander to the nostalgia of then 30-something fans of G1, outside of being a truck after years of being a monkey. It just feels like a really fun and solid truck mode that kids and adults alike can enjoy within play. Well, almost solid. This is where my only real gripe with the figure comes about. Missing paint apps and visible combiner kibble I can easily give a pass, but what I don't like is the collection of solidity issues. The side panels don't really peg in, so even in light play, you can find them sliding out and ruining the rolling action. The joint at the back where the ladder connects to the grade section really seems to push itself away, and when combined with the ratchets, this section has a nasty habit of straight up falling apart. And even in a standard ladder pose, the joint connecting the combined feet to everything else has quite a bit of wiggle room. Doesn't feel like it'll come apart, but it's not as solid as I'd like personally. None of these issues are deal breakers per se, at least not like the rubber tires might be to some people, but they are there and they are noticeable. It feels like this mode is just shy of being perfect. Regardless, it's still an absolutely wonderful fire engine with minimal blemishes and a fun factor that still pulls its weight to this day. Especially with its beefy size, putting most modern commanders to shame, it's just a fun figure to roll around and play with. And even beyond play, it's an imposing enough design to look good on a shelf. The only other thing I could really ask for is better weapon storage, as the gun just sorta sits there instead of making use of the vast space on the inside. I'm aware you can place it at the front, but 1, this is more for the separated mode, 2, this makes the front of the truck look really bad, and 3, it's a stupid form of functionality anyway. It just doesn't look appealing, and I wish there'd been an extra spot on the inside for it. But that's hardly a substantial issue, considering everything else this lad does. Of course, if you want imposing factor, that's something the Cybertron edition holds in spades. This time helmed by Takashi Kunihiro, the mad lad behind G1 Hot Rod and Rodimus, Lio Kaiser, Classics Astro Train, 07 Optimus Prime, Universe Cyclonus, Revenge of the Fallen Lockdown and Optimus Prime, so we did both primes, Siege Omega Supreme, Buzzworthy Origins Bumblebee, and oh yeah, HasLab Unicron. That's him taking a sip of tea next to the bloody thing. Suffice to say, this guy has done a lot of really good toys over the year, and this toy is no exception. Of course, this one was developed as a Western concept first, with play value pushed to the forefront, even more so than the RID version. While Takara didn't really consider car robots a success in Japan, least at the time apparently, America did consider the imported Robots in Disguise one. As such, a partnership was formed, a collaboration between Hasbro Concepts and Japanese animation production. Prime comes at the tail end of this style, and in many ways, he's perfected it. You lose the realism, but you gain possibly one of the most creative fire engines in Transformers history. The front is an absolutely wonderful melting pot of 2000s aesthetics, with a mean as grille and clear and concise color layout. The blue windows on the RID version were fairly nice, but the shade here is utterly gorgeous. It pierces through the white frame, almost seeming like a snow vehicle. The white stripe below brings back that G1 style in a subtle way, and provides a nice bit of breakup. Also, correction for the last time I covered this design. No, not that one. There we go. Initially I assumed that increasing the white around the trim of the windows was a stylistic choice, but apparently it's accurate to the anime rendition of the design. My mistake, though I still don't like this approach. And technically the toys came first and the show was based on them, not the other way around. Just like Beast Wars and Moving further down, the grille adds just a hint of utilitarian stylization. Not enough to make this thing seem at all realistic, but still a very nice touch. I love how the fists become the bumper. It's such a unique and clever idea. Feels a bit toyetic at times, but that's part of this toy's charm as, well, a toy. The bronze highlights over the transparent blue backing are really nice too, though I think I might actually prefer the hybrid style's idea of using yellow instead. Not the execution, mind you, since it pulled it off piss poorly, but definitely the idea. Would have been nice to use something more striking, like the yellow they used on the floodlights. Wait a minute. Why are the top lights painted? Yes, I'm afraid I have to come clean. This isn't actually Cybertron Optimus Prime. No, as this figure is a sponsored sample from Japan, it is actually the Galaxy Force version, featuring some subtle differences. Makes sense, if you buy a secondhand copy from Japan, chances are it's not going to be the American version. That said, the differences are pretty minimal. There aren't a lot of them, and it's mostly minor paint app changes and sound effect differences. Not that the latter matters anyway, since the sound effects don't even work on either of my copies. And nothing of value was lost. But yes, this being the Hasbro version and this being the Takara version isn't going to affect the outcome of this Versus review. And hey, it beats the original idea for this before the sponsor offered me this opportunity. Comparing RID Prime to the red and black later wave redeco, that would have been weird. This is Galaxy Force Galaxy Convoy, and this is Cybertron Galaxy Force Optimus Prime. Confused? Don't worry, we're not doing that, you'll be fine. Anywho, going into this, I thought I was going to be bothered by the hinges on the top. I mean, I was bothered on the red and black version beforehand, and yes, I'm referring to it as such to avoid confusion. But here it seems to blend in a lot better. The side windows also work quite well. It's a good way to hide the combining joints on the vehicle mode. Speaking of, no, we're not going to discuss the various combinations in this video. We're judging these on their own merits out of the box. What's the point of gut-eyeing if the base figure is shit, eh? Moving to the back, we probably get the most armored up trailer Optimus Prime has ever had, short of maybe those unofficial G.I. Joe ones. The greebling has really come a long way in 4 years, handled by a separate designer here. Fun fact, since the Unicron trilogy, he's done a lot of deco designs, like Run Amok, and Combat Megatron, and Amazon Impactor and Spindle. Oh, is that a shark I see? Anyone got a jet ski? Regardless, the rivets and panels really bring this thing to life. And you even got echoes of robots in disguise with the grills on the gun modules. The gear sections towards the back might seem haphazard at first, but in the context of being an Optimus Prime, you quickly realize they're actually a throwback to the original trailer stripes. See them using the same shapes? Me, that's clever. The guns on the top also strike a nice balance between presence and proportion. They're big enough to feel imposing, but not so big they feel ridiculous. Combined with their ratcheted posing in 2 different directions, and you've got yourself something that honestly feels more like a tank at times. A tank truck. A TAC. Or an artillery vehicle. I really like how the hand cannon incorporates into the gun itself. It makes this thing feel a lot more cohesive, especially after RID Prime half-assed it. Both guns are also compatible with the line-wide gimmick, the Cyber Key Power! Basically, you get this big old key with every figure you get, and you jam it in there and a hidden weapon or extra feature opens up. It's probably my favorite feature of the trilogy, as it ends up being the least intrusive, aside from the Energon stars, which, can that even be counted as a gimmick feature? The key Prime comes with is actually one of the biggest differences between Hasbro and Takara versions, as here it has a gold border to accentuate the Matrix motif, while the Hasbro version is just clear blue. The Hasbro ones also have a code on the back, something to do with a now defunct site. Good news is, if you lose a key for any particular figure, they all work between them. Long as you have one key, your entire Cybertron collection should be fine. Regardless, the left one gets 2 small cannons flipping out, lame, and the right one opens up like a railgun. Pretty damn cool. These are supposed to light up and make sounds, but again, the electronics are nothing really lost here though, they're still fantastic toys without them. The right gun, both on the sides and the handgun attachment, also fires missiles. Unfortunately, however, this copy is missing most of them. Don't particularly mind though, as it looks fine without them. And how many adult collectors really use spring-loaded missiles? Much prefer the standard weapons we get on Chug these days. Of course, if you lose more than just the missiles and find yourself without the gun as well, it's not the end of the world. The cannon still works fine without the extra attachment. And if that wasn't enough, you have 2 extra guns on the inside that can fold out. Would have been nice if they rotated out even further, but I don't know if there was any extra budget left in these things. Already they're waffling up on the inside. Yeah, hollowness isn't necessarily a new thing. It very much existed way back when, just ask Armada Prime. Now of course, if this whole behemoth of a gun rack isn't to your speed, unlike RID Prime, it can be removed. You just pop that sucker off and... that certainly is a robot lying down. Look, I understand the nostalgia for this, especially as someone who grew up with the Legends version, or at least a KO of it, but you gotta take a step back and actually examine this in a vacuum. This is not a cohesive truck. It's basically SS-105, but way back in 2005. So that they can service the robot mode, the front of the truck is awesome, but the back is just some legs sitting down. They try to disguise it by extending it further with the super mode legs, but it actually ends up making it look worse. I guess the exposed matrix cavity is fine, if a bit hollow, but the exposed waist skirt really sticks out like a sore thumb. I personally love this configuration because it's basically my childhood come to life, but trying to put on a critic's lens for a second, yeah, this is daft. That's not the only issue I have here though. There are a few blemishes that keep it from being a top tier vehicle, and these these blemishes all real boil down to one key concept: solidity. Seems to be a running theme between these two. Try picking up the truck and you'll notice the legs start to droop. There's not really any tabs keeping them in place. The skirt piece sort of tries, but it fails miserably. All the weight is being held in place by the ratchets in the hips. I suppose it's better than hybrid style's non-existent attempt, but I feel a fold-out panel or just anything would have really solidified this as a near-perfect fire engine. Secondly, or I suppose thirdly at this point, I still don't like the spring-loaded wheels. They make more sense here now that the shins aren't made entirely out of die-cast, but I just worry about the longevity of these wheels. He rolls well thanks to the wheels being pinned, and they look lovely with the bronze paint, but how long will that last? I'm already lucky to have this in such good condition. The seller classified this as borderline junk, but I'm just not seeing it. Maybe it's the aforementioned missing missiles, but like, who cares? And finally, when combined with the trailer, yeah, the wings on the side still don't tab in anywhere. They do mostly stay in place thanks to the ratchets they've used, which again is infinitely better than old bridge style, but like, couldn't have included a tab to at least keep these front sections in place? No? Real shame. Still, even with all of those blemishes, he's still a killer fire engine. He may not have the realism, but he more than makes up for it with his play value. This truck has 16 times the detail, and at least triple the play features. Unless you're a hardcore G1er who needs that G1 connection, it's an alt mode that easily worms your way into your heart with its sheer chunkitude and endless fun times. With that said, I still think I have to give this round to the Robots in Disguise version. The highs on Cybertron Prime are much higher, but only really by a little. RID Prime gets pretty damn close and is more consistent overall. Cybertron Prime has so many cool details in a vacuum, but RID Prime blends all the bits together in a really unique way. Sure, you can't remove the trailer from RID Prime without being left with an incoherent mess, but would you really call trailerless Cybertron Prime coherent either? An idea is just more solid. Sure, bits get a bit wibbly, but nowhere near on the level of the Cybertron version. Don't get me wrong, both figures deliver truly outstanding vehicle modes. These are both the creme de la creme of 2000s truck goodness. It's just that RID edges out ever so slightly. But that's just one part of the journey with these figures. How do they fare in the other aspects? Well, before jumping into the engineering, we've got one more section. See, what good is a trailer without a play function? You gotta add some fun factor into the mix, right? Well, both of these managed to come up with an idea to tick that box. But first, an ad break is in order, and you're gonna want to stick around for this one because somehow this episode is sponsored by Buyee. Yes, indeed, this basically feels like the equivalent of your favorite restaurant telling you you're allowed to eat there for free with a commission on top of that, because legitimately, I've been using Buyee for years before they reached out anyway. In essence, Buyee is a proxy service that allows you to get a great many items from Japan, ones you wouldn't be able to get access to normally. Unlike most freight forwarding services, however, they handle the stuff for you. No need to type a complicated address or learn a whole language. They handle all the deets. All you gotta do is find a listing on their site, whether through Amazon Japan or Marachi or even Takara Tomy Mall, in case you've missed out on some exclusives and need a second chance. Just be sure to put the Japanese names into the search, as that'll give you the best results. If you're having trouble, they also have a Discord server too, so that'll help. This is of course why Cybertron Prime is the Takara version. Of course, buying from Japan means the figure is going to be, well, Japanese. And I'm being completely honest in regards to using them before. Both my Keroro Starscream and Minerva Wanderfest kit were purchased on the site, though I've still yet to finish building the latter. Anywho, if any of this interests you, there will be an affiliate link in the description. Said affiliate link offers 10% off for any new accounts created under it. To be honest, if you're not on Buyee already, what's wrong with you? Seriously. What's wrong with you? Each figure handles its trailer compatibility differently. Robots in Disguise is a lot more parts formery than most trailers on the market, so it faces different boons and shortcomings. On one hand, they can configure the parts in any which way they like, but on the other, they're limited by the parts they have. The end result is clearly just a bunch of parts put together in the vague shape of a base. And this is coming from someone who genuinely likes the Legacy Armada base mode. It's nice that they sort of bring things back to basics. At the time, it was a lovely throwback to the classic Medic Bay. Hell, in spite of all the turrets on show, it was actually used as such in the show. Speaking of, the fingers work surprisingly well as guns. Used to think these looked daft, but actually they work reasonably well. I also quite like how the ladder falls out, giving the appearance of more bulk. It's not the best base mode, but it's far from the worst either. However, I just can't escape the feeling that it's a bunch of combiner bits stuck together. This is common for most figures that undergo gut-ification. You can't go ham on the base mode to too extreme a level, lest you end up with the original Armada Prime, where, yay, the base mode is awesome, but f*** the combined mode is shit. But still, I have to call it like I see it. It's a nice thing to have, especially if you primarily display Prime in robot mode and need something to do with the extra bits, but it definitely could have been better. Meanwhile, Cybertron Prime takes a simpler approach. The trailer doesn't particularly do anything separately, save for being able to stand on its own like the classic G1 trailer. I guess this can double as an artillery platform, but it really just seems like traditional storage for me, and nothing particularly interesting. But that's not the main thing this trailer does. Oh no. Fold the side panels down and boom! Now is a flying fire engine. Conceptually, this is incredibly stupid. It feels like the kind of thing a kid would come up with as a fan mode, or as a fan design of some Thunderbirds OC thingamajig. And yet, that's kind of what makes it so brilliant. It's so brazen, so daft, and that's why it works so well. And that's not to say there aren't subtleties to appreciate either. The stabilizers becoming missiles is really clever, and I quite like how the wheels now double as turbines. And the guns moving to the side really help fill out the mass, so it doesn't feel like a truck with wings plastered on the sides. Well, here's that, but it feels more purposeful than that. See hybrid style? See where you went wrong? One thing to keep in mind though, the Takara versions has the wings pinned in, while they're just on friction joints on the Hasbro version. Both are plenty solid, and I've never had any trouble with either. Well, I haven't owned this sample for very long, mind you, but the point still stands in regards to the red and black version. So yes, I ultimately have to give the win to Cybertron Prime here. Technically, the Robots in Disguise base mode is more cleverer and more uniquer, but you can't deny that old Galaxy Boy just pulls his idea off better. Daft as the concept is, it goes to show that sometimes less is more. In regards to these two, I always find myself going back to the flight mode on Cybertron Prime, at least on the red and black version I had prior, whereas I think I've only used RID Prime's base mode once in total before working on this video. That should tell you all you need to hear, really. So point 1 for Cybertron Prime, tying both votes. Still got plenty of functionality to get through though, so let's see how things fare further on. You know, it's really funny actually, the last few videos I've done have all been non-traditional reviews, so it's been a really long time since I've done a traditional transformation. It feels kinda nice getting back into the groove of things. But regardless, these two are very much emblematic of their time. You've got the experimental period of Robots in Disguise 2001, and of course the simple but effective period of the Unicron trilogy. Now of course with Robots in Disguise Prime, we do have to address the elephant in the room. The first thing you gotta do is grab it by the sides and literally remove it from the thing. Sometimes it's really hard to remove. Come on, get out of there, come on. Jesus, there we go. That was way more difficult than it should have been. But yes, elephant in the room, this is Optimus Prime and the rest is just a detachable trailer. This style of parts forming is integral to the figure itself, and it might be off-putting for some people. Personally though, I think it's really creative because it allows Optimus Prime to do things that the character isn't really associated with usually. They push the design to its absolute limits, and I really appreciate it for doing that. First thing you want to do is bring these panels around and fold them around the entire robot like so. Same thing on this side, and again, I just wish there'd been some more tabs here. This kind of transformation is really cool because the wheels don't end up being fake, it just shows the mechanical detail underneath. But they just don't tab in, they just sit on the side there. That's like my one biggest gripe with the transformation. I mean, the rest of it is great. Look how the rest transforms. You accordion the whole thing out. It transforms in a spiral, unfolding, and it's just brilliant. Like, look at that shit. That's awesome! With the legs, you want to separate them, rotate the knee swivel around like so, come around to the back and open up the panel, and that'll allow you to bring out the legs like so, and then you collapse it and that locks it in place. Not sure why this doesn't go all the way down and kind of sits a little bit outward there. It's a bit odd, but oh well, I guess. The arms sort of rotate into place on this backwards butterfly like so, which will give you the clearance for the torso a bit later, which functions by pushing the whole thing down and gives you a nice head reveal as well. The arms are also on sliding rails and they pop out and rotate around, which also reveals the fists as you do it. And yes, he does have sliding rails, but I feel these are done quite alright. They've got sort of ratcheted slash spring-loaded mechanisms in there, so they don't feel like they're gonna break over time, at least compared to a lot of modern instances. And last but not least, don't forget to fold up the light bar like that, so he's got a bit of stuff on the back. It's a really clever transformation, and it integrates the sound chip and speaker into it very well, so it's not sitting around clunkily like, say, Energon Ironhide. It's these kinds of interesting transformations that I wish we'd see more on modern toys, instead of everything being, you know, the same old G1 transformation over and over again. Of course, Cybertron Prime is very much a back to basics type of conversion. This was very much a return to the G1 style of transformation, even though it might not seem like it now. Specifically the Power Master conversion, where the torso is formed from the back here. Interestingly, everything functions in large chunks, almost like an upscale deluxe. But it doesn't feel like an upscale deluxe because the ratchets are ungodly. Sorry, Diamond Bolts, I love ratchet joints, and this is a great example of how to do them right. First thing you want to do is remove the entire trailer assembly. It just kind of pops off like so. And you're left with this big, beefy boy. I like to deal with the windows first, just so that this doesn't fall down by accident while you're transforming it. So the windows are on double joints, they rotate outwards and onto the sides here. Much better than the sliding rails you saw on the hybrid style version. Anyway, they peg together like so with a nice satisfying click sometimes, or a nice soft click on others. Really depends on the day. After that's done, you take these ratchets and you bring them down like so, come around to the bottom, and these are on double ratchet joints with springs between them so they have enough clearance, so they just move like so into place. Then you can come around here and separate them like so, and fold down the hip skirt. You want to take these two sections and separate them. They're on double hinges that give you plenty of clearance, but you still need a bit more clearance, so you want to bring the elbows down like that. That'll give you even more clearance. So then you can rotate these out to the side, and then peg these into the actual combiner joints. Yeah, these things on the side are combiner joints specifically for Leo Breaker, but what's interesting is that the arms peg into the combiner joint like so. So they make use of existing parts there. And no, I'm not going to discuss Leo Breaker in this review. I don't even own the thing. Maybe one day would be nice, but not for now. Anywho, the last things you want to do is bring the shoulders up like that, and then come around to the back, and you got this lever, and it just brings up the head like so. A dramatic head reveal. I love how both of these have dramatic head reveals. It really plays into the toyetic factor, and I mean that as a compliment, not as an insult. These are toys in the best sense of the word. Also, side note, I'm really glad these stay in place for once, unlike the last time. God, that was stupid. So yeah, these two both have very solid transformations. If we're talking about the build quality in the transformation itself, as in the play feel, I'd probably give it to Cybertron Prime. But overall, simply on the fact that it's more interesting, it's much more clever, the overall score would go to Robots in Disguise Prime. He just does more. The idea is far more interesting. Again, neither of these are bad, it's just he edges out ever so slightly. They're both endlessly fun, and if you're a parts forming hater, you'd probably prefer this one. But for me personally, RID Prime takes the win here. These days, a lot of fans associate 2000's Optimus Primes with their super modes, at least up until the first movie. Why bother with the core robot when the entire point is to combine it with the trailer and create a centerpiece in your childhood collection? Big robot fun, why care about small robots? Well, considering the vast majority of the time the core robot is what you see in the show, you can't just leave it to the wayside. You gotta put in some effort, some pizzazz, lest you end up with Energon's outing. I love you, but let's face it, you got issues. Fortunately, both cases ensured you were getting your money's worth. In both instances, they've guaranteed enough play value could be found with a standalone figure. That being said, from a glance, it's pretty obvious which of the two pulls everything off better. Neither of these are bad, but when it comes to the RID version, yeah, he's got issues. It feels like they had some really good ideas, but they just couldn't get them to work properly. The legs are done extremely well, with extensive layering and wonderful deco choices. I adore how the wheels basically fold out, so technically they're not faux parts. I'm by no means a faux parts hater, but it's a really neat thing to see. Then you've got the silver and the blue and yellow highlights, and my word, this thing goes hard. But then you start to turn it around and you get the same problem the guy had in vehicle mode. There's just no tabs holding this thing together. The panels are just sitting there, hoping the friction keeps it in place. Did they not want the vehicle mode to have any blemishes? A tab on the side wouldn't have been that big an issue. Worst you'd have gotten would have been some whingy fans like the ones who complain about the top part of SS86 Hot Rod. Like, bro, it would have been fine. But then you get further up, and the design really starts to fall apart. I really dislike the way the white sprues are handled. Everything this color is done in comes across as veiny and way too organic. I realized they were just coming off a 5-year streak of bestial designs, but this mechanical detail really feels too fleshy in comparison to everything else, almost looking like the details you'd see when you get up close and personal with a phallus. And I don't mean that as a joke. I mean, look at the insides of the legs. See all this cool hidden detail? Imagine if the rest of the design had stuff like this. Bit of a missed opportunity. The head is okay, I guess. They're trying to go for that rounded aesthetic that many early 2000s designs had, sort of the stuff you'd see in Will Smith's bastardization of Asimov's iRobot.
Oh, that's hot.
I don't know if it completely pulls it off though. Something about it just looks soulless. Maybe it's because the details are a bit soft, not quite as crisp as the other mechanical detail. It is cast on the white sprue after all, just using a blue coat. Possibly it's the fact the eyes are too big, coupled with them being chromed instead of traditional paint. It looks like you've seen some shit. The biggest fumble though, I'd say, is the torso. The design is, on paper, truly wonderful. The windows peeking through the vest with the segmented ab section, it's all the makings of a wonderful Optimus Prime torso. Only for it to be flat as a pancake. Imagine if it had been layered with all the extra details like the show model. That could have been a really nice touch, but unfortunately it's just missing here. It's not helped by the fact it's chrome, and not the durable kind either. Not only is it likely to be scratched when going into vehicle mode and back, but the combined torso pegs directly into it. So you're going to scratch it going to super mode anyway. Even the articulation is weirdly compromised. For the most part, everything you could want is here, including ball-jointed feet and a bloody waist swivel. But then the side skirts don't move out of the way, limiting outward motion on the hips. And there's no thigh swivel, so that becomes weird. Even the ball-jointed fists make no sense because they're surrounded by a ton of forearm kibble. What are you gonna do with that fist? What purpose does it serve? Especially since his only accessory in this mode is a pea shooter. This has gotta be one of the most piss-poor accessories I've seen. Given it barely does anything in any of the modes, I gotta wonder what the point is at this stage. Fortunately, he does come with another loadout to make up for it. The foot modules end up doubling as rocket pods, pegging into the shoulders. The connection isn't as solid as I'd like, and I would have preferred an extra locking tab to keep these lined up, but credit where credit is due, this actually goes a long way to improving the design. It balances out the truck details between the legs and shoulders, meaning the attention isn't just drawn to the flat as an ironing board chest. It does become more difficult to pose him as the feet are woefully small, but it's a nice option, and definitely preferable to the standard configuration. This mode isn't hateful, but I definitely feel it's a step behind the fire engine. The detail presents a lot of growing pains, relearning the mechanical detail stylings after years of beasties and relying on G2 reissues to fill the ranks. There's fantastic ideas on show here, and with a few small modifications, this could be a top-tier core robot mode. It's just, in its then current state, I don't really think it hit the mark. Here's a sentence that somehow makes grammatical sense. What even is the English language? Of course, as I said, many of RID Prime's issues were likely growing pains, the design team getting back into the groove of things after leaving the furry fandom. By 2005, they'd well and truly got their muscle memory back, and it's absolutely clear with Cybertron Prime. No more aesthetic dissonance, no more oddities or clashes. This design comes into its own with a newfound consistency and class, even more so than his Unicron trilogy predecessors. The torso provides probably the first big example of G1 but stylized, as everything is here, but in a newfound alien look. You've got the iconic angular torso, pulling a sort of inverse of the RID version, but now in this crisp, transparent blue. The white stripes, grille, yellow light hip skirts, and blue perineum are all here from the G1 Classic, but with sharp new angles and layering effects. You'd expect the silver to seem boring, as it's getting a bit close to Games Workshop grey, but it pulls above with a lighter shade, just barely. And even then, it's not in large enough quantities where it would seem overbearing. You quickly stop focusing on it too once you get to these big, meaty clompers. I'm not sure if this metallic blue is exclusive to the Takara version, or if both presented, but either way, it's incredibly lush. Not quite as shiny as the hybrid style, but still enough to look gorgeous. They have some pretty nice detail on show too, almost like it was ripped straight from the cybernetic space cube. Interestingly, the side profile actually looks sexier than the front. Part of that could be thanks to the visible combiner clips for the vehicle mode, which are kind of annoying, but still perfectly understandable. Those tend to get ignored as well once you're hit with the awesome silver kneecaps. Lovely bit of detail, and actually the main point of difference in this mode between Hasbro and Takara releases. The Hasbro one doesn't go all the way through the middle, so if you're after a specific version, be sure to look out. Of course it's minor, and I don't think it's very consequential anyway, much like the fact the nose is painted on this one, but not on the Hasbro. Okay, I guess? The arms are absolutely gorgeous. The shoulder pad aesthetic works insanely well. They raise the shoulder line and give him a powerful physique. Also helps the shoulder isn't mounted extremely low like the last time I took a look at this character design, but whatever. They great. Love how they get the full filling from the back. You just know a modern rendition would have left that hollow. They really had a massive budget back then, able to go hard on practically everything except the extra leg cannons. I do wonder about the longevity of these pieces given their friction joints are not ratchets, but almost 2 decades on and I've yet to hear anyone report these failing. Besides, they can't be that much worse than the hybrid style outing, who didn't even last a few months. I also adore the way the forearms work, repurposing the pipes as knuckle dusters. It's stuff like this that really makes me miss the creative aspect of character design in Transformers. Many recent media outings have been very safe. When are we gonna get back to the batshit insane original stuff? The Terrans were a step in the right direction, but I want to see them go further. We really haven't since Robots in Disguise 2015. That's not to say this figure is all new ideas though. This is probably the closest thing to G1 since G2 was around, and as such, they've decided to bring in a Matrix gimmick. No crazy lights and sounds, just a simple opening chest and removable Matrix. This might seem like nothing nowadays, but back then it was quite a big deal. Unfortunately, removing it is a bit of a pain. You can't hold it properly. But unlike most modern examples, this one has the excuse of literally being the first to do it. Or at least one of the first.
Am I a joke to you?
I think we can cut it some slack. The other accessory slash gimmick integration involves his gun, which unpegs from the trailer assembly. This one's nothing special, but my word, it is leagues better than the one that came with RID Prime. Really, the only thing I can criticize is the head. Yes, I know it's iconic, but in the configuration that's supposed to go with this loadout, it just looks weird. Primes with mouths have usually been fine, but here it just looks off. Granted, it also looked off in the show, but again, the toy was designed first. They chose to make it look like this. Now, this issue is kind of moot though, considering you can just flip the mouth plate up. Problem solved, right? Well, that's the thing. Because of the mouth plate gimmick, the head ends up being way too big for the body. You've got this huge powerhouse where everything works to convey the size of this lad, and then you get this huge head that makes him seem way smaller than he is. Interestingly, both Hybrid Style and Legends of Cybertron fixed this issue, but because of the faceplate gimmick as well as prioritizing super mode proportions, it just doesn't work well. Still, that's really the only thing I can criticize with this. Everything else is done to a high quality level with impeccable build quality, awesome paint, and solid articulation. Yes, you do lose the football joints and waist swivel back from 2001, but unlike RID Prime, he actually has all the bare necessities. Everything functions properly this time, backed by a symphony of wonderful ratchet joints. I love how the front and side skirts actually move out of the way to allow extra motion. It's something that's not even that common nowadays, so kudos. Also, one thing I did notice about this, one thing I forgot to put in the script. Yeah, the outward ratchet only actually goes that far, and that is a bit annoying. I'm willing to cut it some slack because of the age of the figure and because it's got all the basics down pat, compared to Robots in Disguise Prime, who's missing a lot of those basics. But it is something I have to mention. Not enough to bring down the score, but definitely something I have to touch upon. So yes, it should be no surprise which of these two takes the core robot win. RID Prime has the cooler concept, but Cybertron Prime just pulls it off better. And it makes sense, this robot mode comes later in the engineering paradigm. The design team was more sure of themselves. They'd had all of RID and 2 years of the Unicron trilogy building up to this point. Again, neither of these are bad robot modes. I just think RID is a bit wibbly, all things considered. And with that, god damn it, we're back to a tie again. I guess it all comes down to this, the final countdown. 2 points left. Who's gonna take it? Both of these figures undergo very different conversions. They're both trying to accomplish completely different things. One is simply add a backpack and extend the legs, while the other goes through an entire metamorphosis. They're basically accomplishing different things, so it's a bit difficult to compare the two. Of course, with Robots in Disguise Prime, the first thing you have to do is basically pull it apart in every direction. It's like building one of those rebrickable sets, you gotta take the thing apart first. The next thing you want to do is prepare all of the bits. We'll start off with the feet. You bring up this section here, bring out the shin section here, which we'll tab on later, and then the bottom's a little bit annoying. You have to first rotate the foot up 90 degrees, then rotate the wheels in, then rotate the foot the rest of the way. If you try doing it on its own, the feet just won't actually move. They get stuck because of that tab there, and because of the way the rest of the foot works. I don't know why it does that. It's very weird. But as Emgo would say, second verse, same as the first. Now these bits don't do anything, they just remain as is, but the arm pieces do. These essentially untab in these 3 places here and then fold in on themselves. They're basically folding inside out, ironically kinda like the titanium version with the legs. So you do get a bit of that DNA carried over there, but yeah, basically folds inside out. And of course you don't need to orient the guns in any way because they're already the way they are, compared to the base mode at least. And now that we've got everything done, we can basically combine it all. You want to take the foot there, and there's a nice big old hole there to peg into that peg inside there. Gets in there nice and solidly. Might not seem like it at first, but it does get in there. And once it gets in there, you can then peg that in. And a nice old solid foot like so. Same on the other side. Yes, some modern engineering could improve it, but it's alright for now. Let me just plonk him down. Might start off with the arms before we do the rest of the torso, just to make it a bit easier. Pull out the arms like so. That will allow you to peg them onto the shoulders like so. The connection's regrettably not as sturdy as I'd like, but it does well enough. And then you can bring them back in almost all of the way. Not all the way, because then there won't be any clearance, but most of the way at least. The fists attach basically the way you'd expect. They get in there pretty tightly as well. They're pretty sturdy. And they look long now, but they'll look better later. And then this is the only real part I have any gripes with. You want to bring this up just enough so that the head is no longer there. So not all the way up like that, but just half the way, really. And that's when you bring in this big section. And you can pretty much tell how it's supposed to transform, but you have to bring the light bars back at the back there so we got more clearance. Then it's really just plonk this on the top with the 2 pegs, rotate this 90 degrees, which will then let you move it on a separate joint there, and rotate it all the way around the back like so. It protrudes out a bit, so you're gonna have to take this bottom bit and actually rotate it in, and then that'll give enough clearance for the ground. Clearance for the ground, bit of a weird statement. Anywho, the reason the chrome's all scuffed up is because we've got 2 pegs here, and that actually pegs into the chrome. Not a great design in the modern era, but for the time I suppose it was fine. Anywho, last thing you want to do is make sure the ear spikes are up, and I suppose straighten out this to the extent that you want it to. It can be adjusted. And yeah, that is RID Optimus Prime. In the mode most people remember him for. In the mode that looks like a bloody fire officer. And he's just as imposing as he should be. Couple of quirky bits here and there, but all things considered, it's remarkably unique and remarkably fun. Cybertron Prime is a much simpler beast. You are essentially adding a backpack to him. He's not combining so much as his powering up with a jetpack. And sometimes that's all you need, and he does it very well, and it is very fun to do. In fact, I'd say it's a bit more fun than the Robots in Disguise version. Well, fun, at least. The only real preparation you need to do for the jetpack is remove the 2 feet sections, and then it's ready to go. And the only real transformation Prime does is rotate these feet forward. This is why it's on a double hinge along with a spring, so that it can stretch around and actually fit in place there. And the toe even folds flush with the rest of it. That is pretty clever if you ask me. It's very simple, but it's a very nice transformation. Doesn't do much, but it's a great use of mass. Again though, I'm not really a fan of those spring-loaded wheels. I gotta wonder for the longevity of this thing. This one's been kept in good nick, but I don't know about other copies. Anywho, you take these 2 bits and you separate them. And because this guy is a big motherfucker, he needs heel spurs. So they just peg into the 2 slots at the back there, and you rotate the gun forward and it clicks into place, and they rotate around. But in the end, that's how it works. And of course, you can probably guess how this transforms. It opens up at the back here. You rotate it around into place so that the wheels are facing the top, and so that from the front you can see all of that lovely detail, and also have the guns at the bottom so they can sling under the forearms. And what's really nice is that even back then they had these wonderful shoulder straps. They just unpeg from there, and then the whole thing slots in, just like a backpack. It doesn't cheat. It doesn't just stick into the back. It actually slots under the shoulders. It's really good, and it even locks in place together. Really feels like what they're trying to convey. And then from there, you just kind of bring the guns around as you see fit. And for the faceplate, you've got a lever at the back that folds that up, and then you're supposed to bring out the ears, and as you do that, and then you start playing whatever theme song you got at the time. Whatever song from the OST you so desire. So yeah, he is a very simple beast, but he is incredibly effective. Every part is just a joy to go through, mostly because everything has so much hardware in it. It's just a joy to move in every way. So it's really difficult to compare these two, and please ignore the change in lighting. I had to do this the next day because the rain settled in and it was way too loud to record the rest of it. So yeah. Oh god. Oh, it's raining again. Yeah, the shit was so torrential that it ended up flooding the airport. But yeah, these two are really difficult to compare because you got a complete metamorphosis, a complete reinvention, the most batshit gut high you can imagine with its standalone trailer, and then a simple but effective backpack. They're trying to do different things, but even then, I think I'm gonna have to go for Robots in Disguise. Yes, Cybertron Prime does have better hardware and it's probably a bit more fun, but this guy is just an event. Putting him together is just something else. The way all the parts fit together, especially the feet. Sure, it's got a bit of jank, but it more than makes up for it in batshit insanity. Whereas this guy, yeah, it's just a backpack. It's iconic as f***, but it is just a backpack. So another point to Robots in Disguise, but again, both of these are bloody brilliant. They're both fantastic super mode conversions, probably some of the best the franchise has ever done. It's just by a fraction of a hair, Robots in Disguise takes this win. And I mean a fraction. I mean a millimeter. I mean a nanometer. I mean the smallest measurement you can imagine. Because these are both f***ing ace. And here it is, the embodiment of Transformers in the 2000s. It's everything the franchise was until it was forever changed by the movies. All of the chunk, all of the insanity, all of the gimmicks, these two are the poster children of it all. As for which is the better of the two, well, that's a tough one. Robots in Disguise didn't really have a handbook on how primes were supposed to be designed at the time, so they really just went ahead and made a giant tokusatsu mech. In essence, he's a giant fire officer robot. At least from what I'm seeing, the head is supposed to mimic the helmet right down to the chin straps. The water hoses strap around the torso, and he's even got the massive boots to kick the doors in. They really just slammed Optimus Prime into Fireman Sam, and it works really well. The head sculpt finally comes into its own, blending the traditional Prime ear design with the Fire Officer aesthetic very well. Could use a bit more paint, but at least the eyes are properly proportioned this time. The torso below it is probably the biggest departure Prime has ever seen, even more so than Armada. So many layers and different levels of paint with the crisp orange and powerful gunmetal. You even get yellow highlights that most people don't tend to notice. And on top of that, his nipple opens up to reveal a sculpted matrix of leadership. Bit bland, I'm afraid, but it's still a nice thing to have. The legs end up blending in with the new parts very well. While you sadly lose the transparent blue peeking in, you gain these wonderful meaty clompers. On paper, these seem like a terrible idea, using only two connections that barely seem sturdy. But no, they actually remain super solid. My only real gripe is the panels on the sides here just sticking out. I don't know, they just don't really seem to blend in with the rest of the design. If these could have been hidden entirely, just leaving the truck windows, it would have been perfect. Still, at least you don't have to worry about the weird thighs anymore. They get lost in the rest of the mechanical detail, while the forearms aren't even visible anymore. Talk about a glow up. The part where I feel this design really falls short though would have to be the arms, because although they aren't bad, they end up just being really wibbly and weird. The shoulder pads don't actually go down fully into place, they just sit on top, and it keeps bugging me. I know it's minor, but you got all these empty bits on the sides, and the original shoulder pads still peek through at the bottom. It just feels like a bit more of it could be filled out and it'd be perfect. Well, the shoulder pads anyway. The shoulders themselves? Well, I left it out of the base robot mode because it didn't really bother me then. But here, this issue really does. The ratchets only really have two clicks, 45 and 90. Dynamic poses with these arms are basically impossible as a result. And it's a real shame because this is a really dynamic design. And it's pulling its weight in all the other articulation areas. Sure, you lose the waist and ankles and the outward hips are still hella limited, but everything else works fine. By virtue of being tied to an already pretty decent articulated frame, not a lot fails. It's just those damn shoulders bug me a lot. Said shoulders also tend to get stuck on the ladder at the back. No matter what configuration you're in, it always seems to limit the posing just a smidge. Not a deal breaker, but definitely an element of jank derived from the jump between engineering styles. What might be a deal breaker, however, is the massive hollowness you can see from the side, though this one I'm willing to cut more slack. On a more modern figure, perhaps I would have gone harder on shit like this, but here, I don't know, I guess it's fine. From some angles it looks really egregious, but from others you don't even notice it. I do wish this section was more solid though. There's not really many tabs keeping this thing together. Hell, the only thing keeping the torso upright is the fact the head can't fold out fully. And with how wibbly the connection ports are, I'm not sure I trust that system. It's held up after all this time on this copy, but it's hard to say how other copies fare. And word of warning, this is a pretty bad potential failure point on the Encore version. See, Takara decided to reissue this lad a few years back, along with Ultra/God Magnus for the combination ability. Problem is, this thing was rushed out with virtually no quality control implemented. Swapped voice boxes between the two, mold flash galore, misassembly issues, you name it. And to add to all of this, I've had two friends of mine who own it personally claim that this joint in the middle failed after a time, essentially gimping the combined mode. One had it happen out of the box, one had it happen a few months later. Let me put it this way, this release was so bad, Takara issued a recall on the release and asked everyone to refund theirs. When was the last time a Transformers toy was recalled? Not even Maga Jazz had that happen. Word to the wise, if you want this figure, hunt down the original. The Encore isn't even any cheaper. If anything, most hells are more expensive. It just isn't worth it. You're getting a worse built toy for extra money just for some pearly white thighs. Just, why would you do that? But as far as the original toy goes, even with all his flaws, he does quite well. He's got jank in a few areas, but he really perfects the fire engine and fire officer aesthetic. It's definitely a design that can be improved upon, perhaps with an eventual HasLab, but as it stands, it's pretty good. He doesn't really do much, save for a cannon mode over the shoulder, but like, does he need to do anything else? He's not a complete brick like the Prime that followed him, and he's not bogged down with gimmicks like the one after that. He's just a solid, well-designed Prime with some decent paint, cool and unique designs, and above all else, an unparalleled heroic presence. They needed a new Optimus Prime to push the franchise into a new age, and although it may not have hit home as much as they'd have liked in Japan, it's definitely made its mark on the Western world. Well, at least that's how TF Wiki says it, as I said before. I still don't know if I necessarily believe that. He keeps showing up on voting polls for Takara Selects and Masterpiece, so he has to be at least somewhat popular. Oh well, I don't properly speak the language yet. Perhaps that's another question for another time. Now, while there were elements with RID Prime that you could point to and designate jank in the trank, Cybertron Prime is a near pristine beast from practically every angle. There's no proportional dissonance, no weird kibble placement, no lacking engineering. He's simply the core robot with an awesome jetpack on the back. that's the thing. Execution-wise, he's bloody brilliant, but conceptually, he's not all that different from the core robots. The head now features larger ears for whatever reason, and they look bloody amazing. No wonder they went with this style for the Goo-Op version. And with the backpack, the head doesn't look oversized anymore. You can tell they matched it to the proportions of the combined mode. But like, it's still the same head. You can even access the ears from the standard mode, so there's not much difference here. The shoulders are great, but they're still the same. The added shoulder straps give him some wonderful extra heft, but the chest is still the same. Really, the only differences are the feet and the backpack. The new feet actually do a good job of extending the proportions, fitting into that long-legged super robot aesthetic. Yes, this comparison isn't specifically with super robots, but they're both anime and you get the idea. Wouldn't bring this up, but I get comments every time I do this. Also, side note, as I forgot to mention it earlier, the guns on the sides are the last major difference between the Hasbro and the Takara versions. The Hasbro one just coats the outside with red, while the Takara one wraps it fully around. Again, not a major difference, so you can see this comparison is still fine. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the feet folding in is an awesome feature. The way the old ones sit flush with the new toes is brilliant, and the blending is impeccable. But again, conceptually, the combining bits only really become the heel spurs. They're not actually contributing much to the combined mode visually. This does lead to one of the most consistent super modes of the trilogy, but I can't help but imagine what these could have done if they'd gone a bit further. Or, I guess I'm not imagining, because they already did that back in 2001. Of course, I have no complaints with the wingspan. Much like the flying truck mode, these look bloody amazing. They were done back in the day when the designers wouldn't gimp the wingspan for the sake of the budget too, so they're really given the width to shine. Everything that worked previously works again here. Sure, I could complain about the hollowness of the back, but that's to facilitate the heel spur storage. Not to mention they're making sure the weight distribution is up to scratch. Despite the size of this bloody thing, it never feels back heavy. In any pose, it feels nice and sturdy, so no problems there. But getting it into a decent pose is a bit difficult due to one simple factor. Take a look at the guns. You'll quickly notice that he never actually holds them. There aren't any handles to do so, you just have to fake it. This seems like a pretty big thing to forget. Holding the guns is supposed to fire. Already the rest of the functionality is here, as the same cyber key powers activate in the same ways, but it just feels wrong without him actually holding onto anything. Of course, this was fixed later on both Goo-Op and Hybrid style, but even with the age of this figure, I think it's a fair assessment to consider this a flaw. Not that it matters though, because that's his only real flaw overall. It's a fantastic finisher to a toy that's been damn good throughout. It's just, again, there's not much to say about it, because all of his cool ideas have been done already earlier in the figure's conversion cycle. It's a fantastic mode, but it's also very derivative. And I think that sums up the main difference between these two releases. Robots in Disguise is a release that has a few janky areas, but consistently tries to push the envelope and raise engineering to new heights. It's the big return of vehicular engineering, and it's here to make you proud to be a Transformers fan. On the other side, Cybertron Optimus Prime is probably the closest thing many had to G1 outside of Masterpiece and the soon-to-be-released Classics rendition. If you actually look at how this functions, it's strikingly similar to the Power Master version. And that's not a bad thing, both are bloody fantastic figures. It's just one is bold but slightly wibbly, while the other is safe but expertly crafted. And call it a cop-out, but I respect both outlooks in combined mode. And as such, this section remains a tie. If this is the mode you're getting either of these for, you can't go wrong. They're both wonderful play and display pieces, drawing attention wherever they go. They're a reminder that even though modern toys are bloody fantastic, there's a certain charm of the old that they just don't capture in the same way. Modern toys capture their own, equally brilliant charm, but some toys from this era, well, they're just a little bit special. But if we're going for the overall experience, ultimately the points speak for themselves. When you tally everything up, a clear winner comes to the forefront. These are both fantastic figures, worthy of your purchase. But Robots in Disguise just goes that little bit further with its realistic vehicle mode, unhinged engineering, and unique design. Honestly, if we're going purely off nostalgia, I'd probably pick Cybertron Prime. Perhaps it's also a bit of new toy bias, as I'm writing this a lot earlier in the play cycle than I would normally, but examining each individual factor, I cannot deny the scoring. Of course, for the regular review points, I don't think it's fair to give these anything other than the highest score available. We all know these are legendary releases, and just because one is slightly better than the other doesn't mean you shouldn't save up to buy both. This was merely an experiment to see which of these two beloved nostalgic linchpins was the definitive 2000s Optimus Prime. Wasn't really gonna pass up the opportunity to do a project I've wanted to do for 3 or so years when someone basically offered to bankroll it. Yeah, this was meant to be an anniversary special, but it just didn't feel right comparing the red and black version of Cybertron Prime to the standard edition of RID Prime. And then the replacement ears broke because they were mold recasts and not the originals. And yeah, that whole project got flushed down the toilet. But years later, I was finally afforded the opportunity to take this idea for a spin. And after everything, yeah, the results make sense. Robots in Disguise kicked off the anime boom we all knew and loved, and I'm extremely glad to finally understand the importance behind this release. Course is far from perfect. Perfect score doesn't mean a perfect figure, mind you. Back in the day, I thought upgrading the Robots in Disguise version was a fool's errand. How could they improve it when everything was already this good? With a few more reviews under my belt, however, I'm starting to see a few cracks. Perhaps with some modern engineering, they could improve the torso solidity in both aesthetic and engineering. Maybe they could add tabs where they need to be added, and layer the robot torso to a better level. Perhaps it'll be possible at, say, an unlocked price point that doesn't need to be at retail. What I mean to say is HasLab. If you're developing what you're hinting at, then I eagerly await the results. Your move, Hasbro. You've got your work cut out for you. But as always, fan and public consciousness is a conversation, so drop your stance on the matchup below. Do you prefer the 2001 reinvention with Robots in Disguise? Or perhaps the return to form with Cybertron? Which show did you prefer overall? Do you think good old Fire Convoy is due for the HasLab treatment? Big thanks to Buyee once again for sponsoring this video. It's been a long time coming and they made it possible. And as always, remember, there's a context for everything. Till next time. Ah, shit. I did an entire video on Cybertron Optimus Prime and didn't make a single "Our worlds are in danger" joke. Oh well, maybe next time.